Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the library's first webinar of the semester. My name is Megan Kowalski, and I am the Outreach and Reference Librarian for the UDC Library. I'm going to be running the logistics for today's session. I'm joined by my colleague, Catherine Meals, who is going to be presenting today's content. We will have time for questions, both recorded and unrecorded at the end, but at any time, please feel free to put your questions in the chat. Please remain muted until the end, and if you have any questions, also please feel free to raise your hand. So thank you for joining us today. A recording of this will be posted to our YouTube this afternoon, and the link will be sent to everyone who registered. Take it away, Kathy.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Welcome to the UDC Library's Generative AI Basics webinar. I'm Kathy Meals. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm the Reference and Assessment Librarian at the UDC Library. So here's our agenda for today. The world of generative AI is enormous and getting bigger and more complicated with every passing second. And we can't cover everything about generative AI in one webinar. And plus, generative AI is constantly evolving. So today with this webinar, we're just trying to get the conversation started. So think of this session as a beginning to an ongoing discussion and learning process that all of us in the UDC community are in together. So it's definitely not the final word, and we in the library want to encourage additional ongoing conversations. So we'll focus on a few fundamentals of generative AI this afternoon, specifically, what is generative AI and how does it work? The potential benefits of generative AI and how it can help us, the problems and limitations of generative AI and what we should watch out for, the complicated ethics of generative AI, and thinking about responsible use of generative AI. All right. So that we're all on the same page, let's just start off with what generative AI is and how it works. So what is generative AI? Here's a good succinct definition from Merriam-Webster. Artificial intelligence that is capable of generating new content, such as images or text, in response to a submitted prompt, such as a query, by learning from a large reference database of examples. So what makes generative AI different is that it's creating new content, text, images, and so forth. So we're talking about tools like ChatGPT, which got introduced to the world in late 2022, DALL-E, Google Gemini, or Claude. And that's just to name a few. There's tons and tons and tons of tools out there. So now how does that content generation happen? This is a really simplified version because honestly, the full version goes way beyond my own math or computer science knowledge. But in short, the generated content is based on what a generative AI tool has learned from massive, massive amounts of previously existing content of that type. That learning is referred to as training. And through training, the tool is identifying and analyzing mathematical patterns that exist within the content. And then it applies those patterns to essentially predict and produce a response to a prompt or a set of instructions entered by a user. So now that we're all on the same page, let's talk about some things you can use generative AI for. It definitely offers possible benefits, including sparking ideas, helping launch projects, and making work more efficient. So a few examples, it can help with brainstorming new ideas. Maybe you're trying to come up with a paper topic or think of keywords to use as you search for sources for your research assignments, or you're staring at a blank page, not sure where to start on a project. With creating templates, these tools can help you generate templates for emails, cover letters, resumes, and so forth. Creating study tools like outlines, summaries, or quizzes. Revising your writing, looking at the grammar and spelling, improving the flow or adjusting the tone of your words, making what you've written more concise. Translating into or from different languages. And some capabilities of generative AI might be especially useful to people with disabilities. For instance, alternative text for images so that they are more accessible to people with visual disabilities who use screen readers. or providing task support and structure for neurodivergent people or people with cognitive processing issues. You want to take advantage of the benefits of generative AI, it's important to know how to write a good prompt so that you get what you need. But how do you do that? Here's a few tips for that. So, first, think of your prompts as instructions rather than questions. You're not really asking the tool a question, you're telling the tool what to produce, and it needs certain information to do that well. So, your prompt should provide enough context and background information so that the tool can appropriately generate a response. It should include enough detail to get an answer that meets your specific needs. And then tell the tool what you want it to generate for you. This can be related to the intended audience, who's it for, the format it appears in, how long it should be, the style of writing or art, the tone, etc. And without a sense of some of these things, you might get a response that is just too general to be helpful or otherwise misses the mark. But at the same time, just know that you might need a few prompts, making adjustments based on the strengths and the weaknesses of the initial results you get from the generative AI tool you're using. So here's an example of how to strengthen a prompt using here Google's Claude tool. So let's say you have an aunt from out of town who's coming to visit you here in DC, and you could really use some ideas for things to do with her. So you go to a generative AI tool for help. So you might start with this prompt then. What are some good tourist attractions in Washington, DC? We get some good ideas, but they're pretty generic, right? Your aunt might be into those things, but you could also get more tailored ideas that might be more fun for her based on her hobbies and interests. So we can strengthen this prompt by adding information about context, details, and output. So our new prompt might be something like, give me a list of 10 tourist activities for my aunt who is visiting Washington, D.C. She is interested in art, music, and food. And so now we have a manageable list of 10 much more tailored ideas. So that's an example of the benefit of strengthening your prompts. So that was a little bit about the benefits and uses of AI, as well as some tips for prompts. And discussions about generative AI often focus on the benefits of these tools, and there are definitely benefits. But these tools also have limitations and problems that are important to talk about, so we'll do that now. In thinking about tools that generate text, like ChatGPT, we need to remember that what these tools give us is based on mathematical patterns, not critical thinking, reflection, or analysis. The tool is relying on statistical analysis and can't analyze whether it's giving us anything good. The responses might sound confident, but the information could be inaccurate. And tools like these are known to what's called hallucinate or make up information or refer to sources that aren't real. Or the responses might not be useful or follow any logical reason. The mathematical patterns don't provide any actual reality check or fact check to make sure they're not producing misinformation or disinformation. Other issues relate to the training of the tools. So remember that these tools get trained on huge amounts of previously existing content. So that means their responses are drawing on things that have already been said or written or created. And so they're less likely to generate creative, new, or nuanced ideas. And they might also reflect outdated information, depending on how recent the content the tool was generated on. And what they generate can be biased, stereotypical, or harmful, right? Because the tools are trained on content that reflects all of the discrimination and injustices in our society that produce that content. So AI generated content can then easily become racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, ableist, and more. And there are also numerous ethical concerns related to generative AI. First, copyright violations, which are an important ethical concern, but also a legal one. So, to quickly summarize, copyright is the law that allows creators to have full legal right to the use distribution, and sale of their work or the intellectual property that they created. And remember that generative AI models are training on huge amounts of data. Those training data have often contained copyrighted writing, art, and material without the creator's consent, acknowledgement, or compensation. In addition, there are some privacy concerns. While this varies from tool to tool and different tools have different privacy practices, many tools will use anything you enter into it to help train their models in the future. So if you share anything that's personal information, confidential, or should be secret, you risk that information being given to other users of the tool. The last thing we'll mention here today is the environmental impact of generative AI. Generative AI requires a huge amount of computing power and therefore a lot of electricity. And given how most of our electricity is produced, carbon pollution. And this is to power the computers and produce fresh water that cool down the data centers for generative AI. So considering the possible benefits of generative AI, as well as the problems and the concerns we just covered, what do we as AI users or potential users do now? Should we use generative AI because of the benefits and because it's everywhere, so we all need to learn how to use it? Should we not use it because of the limitations and ethical issues? And if we do use it, how should we use it? All of us individually, I think, as well as all of us as a society, are finding ourselves wrestling with this topic. And there are no simple answers because AI is transforming everything, and we're all just trying to keep up now. As one AI expert and computer scientist, Jeffrey Hinton, has described the impact of AI, I think it's comparable in scale with the Industrial Revolution or electricity, or maybe the wheel. So it's huge. And we have a lot to figure out. And like I said, there's no easy answers. Things will keep changing, the change will be fast. But we can offer a few last things to keep in mind as you consider your use of generative AI, especially for schoolwork. So, first, and really importantly for students in particular, make sure you know what your professors think is acceptable use of generative AI. Some professors allow certain uses, others don't. More and more professors are putting policies about the use of generative AI in the class syllabus. So in class, you should abide by those policies. If there aren't policies specific to your class, or if you're not sure whether a particular use of generative AI is okay for a particular purpose, ask. And next, think of generative AI as a tool to support your own thinking in your own work, not as a way to completely create work for you. Your thinking, your knowledge, your expertise, and your analysis are what's most important and what will support your learning and growth as a person and student or faculty member. So beyond that, there's also some AI detectors out there of varying quality, but be aware that any work you submit might be run through a detector. And then lastly, if you do use generative AI, check what it gives you for accuracy, be mindful of your privacy, and above all, be transparent about how you've used it. You can also cite generative AI tools. Several citation and formatting styles are now offering instructions on how to cite your use of tools like ChatGPT, and we're happy to share those if you are interested in those. So that is it for our formal presentation. We can move to Q&A or discussion.
Thank you, Kathy. If anyone has any questions, please don't hesitate to put them in the chat, or if you prefer to ask them, raise your hand and go ahead and unmute yourself.
I have a
Right, so,
question.
yes, go ahead.
So are there going to be additional classes on the generative AI on, let's say, prompt engineering to learn how to build prompts, optimize the prompts, understand, token size, the differences between the different LLMs that are out there, why I may want to use Claude? Do I want to use Opus 3.0, Sonnet 3.5? Do I want to use Gemini? And then how to build on that, or Microsoft Copilot, which we have kind of with our Microsoft account at UDC, and things like that going forward for people who are studying or in work or doing both, and how we can really leverage these tools to it's something that might take me 40 hours to do manually. I can now get done in 90 minutes because an AI, I can give it a proper prompt, it can give me what I'm looking for, and then I can take that and tweak that, and now I've just saved myself 37, 38 hours of
Right,
work.
right, right. Yeah, that's a good question. I think yes, we definitely want to do more on generative AI, right? I said at the beginning, this is just an introduction. This is us just getting started, opening the conversation, and we want to be responsive to what people are interested in learning about. So knowing that you have an interest in prompt engineering in particular, that might be interesting for us to look into for future events like this, or using particular tools, right? Because there's so many tools out there, right? So we want to figure out what might be the most appropriate or the one that's most interesting to people. So yes, more to come. If you have specific recommendations beyond the prompt engineering that you mentioned, or if anybody else here today has any other ideas for things that they want to learn more about, please let us know. Put that in the chat or feel free to follow up with us after the webinar.
Yes, and everyone attending today, you're going to automatically get a survey. So please feel free to add information into the comments there as well. Those surveys are anonymous. The plan right now is to do a few more AI webinars in the spring. We would have loved to bring more to you in the fall, but admittedly, we were moving into our new space, so things did get a bit busy. But one of those webinars we are planning to hold is on, more specifics of the different options that are out there. And there are also all of those various, tools that you mentioned, Claude, Copilot, all of those already do have existing materials. So we recommend, simply going to YouTube and typing in, generative AI tools. You'll get plenty of pre-made stuff on how to use those. But yes, that is something we are looking to explore. One of the questions in the chat, and I'm happy to take this, Kathy, is can AI lead to job displacement? And I'm not going to sugarcoat things. Yes, it can. But at the same time, it can also lead to job creation. There are plenty of job positions out there now for prompt engineers. That didn't exist 2 or 3 years ago. So I think any job that is displaced will be offset by the new jobs that come out of this, because someone has to make AI, someone has to train AI, someone then has to fix when AI gets broken. So, we don't want to look through the world with rose-colored glasses, but we also want to be realistic that most of the jobs we all have today didn't exist 50 years ago. And so there will always be some job loss, but there will be some jobs gained. And Kathy, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I was just going to hop back a slide to this quote from Geoffrey Hinton about how this is comparable in scale with the Industrial Revolution, electricity, or the wheel. Right? This is a huge shift in society, and I think there's certain things we can't know, but what we do know is that when big shifts have happened in the past, like with the Industrial Revolution or electricity, that we have found other ways of working, right? Other jobs, things like that. So again, there's no way for us to see into the future, and this is just changing so fast. Everything that we said today might be out of date, next year. um, but I think what's likely to happen based on historical patterns, previously in similar shifts, is that we will adapt and adjust.
Thanks. Okay, the next question is, does UDC have a generative AI policy for staff, faculty, and students? To the library's knowledge, we have been asked this before, there is not a university level generative AI policy. There may be some departmental policies, so I would check with your specific departments, and I do know some faculty have issued policies for their specific classes. But I also want to remind folks that a lot of what we think about Gen AI needing a policy for relates to plagiarism. And the university does have a standing academic dishonesty policy that still is in force. So you might just want to fall back on that. But if you were thinking of a specific reason for the Gen AI policy, let me know. I do know that this is something that the president in the CAO's office is looking at. So I would say stay tuned on that one. Kathy, did you want to add anything?
No, that's great. Thank you.
All right. And the next question is, how can AI improve our daily lives? I'm going to say that varies from person to person. I do know that as a mom of a 5-year-old who is going to have to deal with the whole figuring out childcare next summer, I'm going to use Gen AI to help me build my child's schedule. Simply so that I don't have to do that. So there are things like that. You can do simple things like dumping in what ingredients you have in your fridge and asking it to recommend some recipes. I know some people have done that with mixed results, but also with some fantastic outcomes. And so how you answer that depends on what problem you're trying to solve. So I would say target a problem in your daily life and then maybe ask it for some options of how to fix whatever that problem is. Have it suggest a new morning routine, possibly different ways to commute to where you need to go. So I would say identify the problem and then figure out what outcome you want out of that. And the best thing about AI is that you can always ask it, okay, I didn't like that, try again. Kathy, if you wanted to add anything.
Sure. I just wanted to hop back a few slides to the uses of generative AI and just, recap some of these. I think several of the ones that we put in here were sort of more focused on academic work. But I think, I was actually thinking exactly of the example that Megan mentioned about recipes, right? There's a lot of different uses of these sorts of things. I've heard of people, you know, using, here's what I've got in my fridge, like come up with the recipe for me for dinner tonight. I've seen people, try to plan vacation itineraries, right? There's a lot of different uses of it, but it kind of boils down to providing something that you can react to, I think, often, a template that you can fill in, a suggestion for a recipe that you can say, yeah, I like that, or no, or I need, you need to add something to that. Um, or, offering a morning routine and you say, well, that's great, but I'm not going to do this part of it. Please suggest something else, right? So it sort of provides something for us to respond to. And in that sort of way, it also helps us become more efficient. So I think there's, certainly some time saving aspects of it as well.
And one of my favorite examples of this is it can take some of the complex thinking that might take us 8 or 9 steps to figure out and reduce it down to simply creating a prompt. There was an NPR host who was trying to figure out if a box from something from IKEA would fit in the back of their hatchback. And so they asked generative AI, would this item from IKEA fit in the back of my car? And they put in the details of their car. And while the AI they use couldn't say, 100%, they're like, if you unbox it, because the size of these items is smaller than the box, and if you put the back seat down, then yes, we can presume that that item will fit. Whereas if NPR host, they would have had to figure that out on their own by unboxing things, measuring, figuring things out, maybe renting a car. And so it can take some of that and make your life a little bit easier. So I would say, play around with it, but being mindful that every time you do use AI, essentially think about every prompt you put in is taking a 16-ounce bottle of water and pouring it on the ground. And so, yes, play with it, but be mindful of how you're playing with it because it is so resource hungry. Another question came in. How is generative AI different from Echo or Alexa? And I had to be careful saying that because I do have one in my home. It's different in the sense that it learns as it goes, whereas something like Echo or Alexa, well, it does have AI built in. It's just more call and response. You ask it to do a thing, it does a thing. It does learn to some level, but it's not this massive, what we call LLM, large language model, where it's trained on millions and millions and millions of inputs of data. They're just not quite as smart. Kathy, I don't know if you want to add anything to that one.
Yeah, my understanding is that Alexa, and I'm not sure about Echo or some of the other similar ones, but I would imagine this is probably happening, is the companies that run them are interested or are already integrating some aspects of generative AI into these tools. So I think those will continue to evolve as well.
Next question is, can AI generated text be detected? Yes.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I think the answer is sometimes, right? I think there is increased interest in detecting it, right? And there are certainly some detectors out there that I know, especially some folks at universities are using. They do vary in terms of quality. So there's examples, of, well, it missed this thing, or, oops, sorry, that was my fault. Oops, sorry. I accidentally hit a button. Um, there's examples of also false positives, right? Where, a faculty member has entered something into an AI detector and it says it's AI generated, but the student insists it's not, right? So I think right now there are certainly detectors and efforts to do that. And the fundamental like outcome of it is mixed.
I would add, yes, there are plenty of detectors out there, and what Kathy said, it's mixed, but because it's trained on what has already been written, it's going to sound like what has already been written. And so it's going to say something, is AI simply because it's trained on something that has previously exist. And AI generated text still sounds like a robot, even if you ask it, oh, I want you to sound like Dr. Seuss, oh, I want you to sound like Oprah. It still sounds a little bit like a robot because it is still being written by what is essentially a robot. So do keep that in mind. And unless you are a prolific writer already, it's not going to sound like you. So in some ways, asking Gen AI to write something is in some ways silencing your own personal voice and experience. So be mindful of that. But in terms of can it be detected? Yes, there are detectors out there. And as Kathy said, it is mixed. So the best thing is, if you are using Gen AI to do some writing, credit it. Cite it like it is another tool. But if you are a student in a class, ask if that is allowed first.
Yeah.
I freely admit I write the blog posts for the library, and every now and then my brain is just really tired. So I say, hey, develop a blog post on this topic. And then what I do is I'm like, okay, I see where you went with that. I'm now going to write this as, me. But it helps get you started. It can be a brainstorming partner to help you get started with writing.
Right. It's a tool, not
Mhm.
not a thing in and of itself to run everything, right? Use it to respond to things. I would say, just to add to AI generated text, I think, in addition to the detectors, I think there still is a lot out there that just you kind of have a sense, like especially if you know how somebody writes or talks, that something just sounds off and not in their voice. And like Megan said, above all, it's your own critical thinking, your own analysis, your own thoughts, your own experiences that matter the most and most contribute to your learning. Um, and again, above all, transparency, right? So ask, is this okay for this use? Or if you do use it, cite the tool that you used. Say I used it for this purpose. Just make sure that it's very above board, right?
And then some of those AI detectors, they are biased against those who have English as a second language, simply because they think, oh, this was AI detected because it wasn't, this was AI created because it's not perfect. But those who have English as a second language, they're used to different syntax and grammar. So they might not conform to what's considered standard academic writing. So do keep some of those things in mind as they are biased against those where English is not their first language. Any other questions? And we will have time for some unrecorded questions at the end if people prefer that as well. Just going to give it a few more seconds to see if anything else comes in. Okay, not seeing anything. I do want to say thank you for attending today and Kathy for presenting. I'm going to go ahead and end the recording, and this will be posted to our YouTube within about an hour.